Hello and welcome to Uncivil Society. I'm Tom Watson. Thank you for tuning in as we kick off 2026. So if you've been following this podcast, you know we're not pulling any punches about the state of American civil society right now. The nonprofit sector, philanthropic institutions, and the very foundations of our democratic immune system are under sustained attack from an administration that views civil society not as a partner, but as the enemy. So today, rather than making predictions, as so many folks are, I wanted to talk about 5 headline centers to watch in 2026. These are areas, people, and trends that civil society leaders, nonprofit executives, foundation leaders, and everyone who's working in our sector toward a more just society should be monitoring very closely. They're not crystal ball predictions. They're, I guess you'd call them signposts, warning lights on the rocky road ahead. So let's dig in. Headline center number 1, the voice that may matter most, Pope Leo and the global defense of civil society. So who is the most important nonprofit and civil society leader in 2026? You know, it's not Donald Trump or Elon Musk, may not be a foundation president or a nonprofit CEO or the head of the UN. It just might be Pope Leo. Think about it. The Catholic Church is the largest social services organization in the world. It's decentralized, to be sure, but its networks reach into every corner of the globe, providing healthcare, education, food assistance, refugee services, and spiritual care to hundreds of millions of people. And Pope Leo has been absolutely vociferous in his defense of immigrants, the poor, and the marginalized. He opposes violence and inequality. He defends free speech, economic fairness, and basic liberal democratic values. He champions religious freedom for all religions, not just Catholicism. And though, of course, you may disagree with him on many issues, and I certainly do, he consistently stands up for the rights of people to live free from violence and persecution. In 2026, as extremism and authoritarianism continue to rise globally, I think the Pope's voice carries moral authority that transcends borders and political parties. When he speaks against the mass deportation of immigrants in this country or the gutting of social services, it resonates in a way that few other leaders can match. Is his opposition voice the one that we'll hear the most in 2026? It might be. And for those of us working in civil society, especially in the United States, where the current administration views religious institutions with suspicion unless they bend the knee, the Pope's unwavering commitment to justice and human dignity is a model worth watching. I also think that because the Pope is an American, he's from Chicago, though of course he has served a lot of his priesthood in South and Central America. He understands what's going on in this country as well as anyone. And the way he answers it and opposes this administration is both fearless and clever. And I think he understands that there's a long road in front of us. So you don't have to agree with him on everything, but pay attention to what Pope Leo says and does this year. His actions could set the tone for how global civil society responds to authoritarian overreach. Headline number 2, when technology meets hatred. Let's talk about AI, artificial intelligence. There's obviously going to be a lot of continued hype around AI in 2026. Program that I'm using to record this podcast includes AI. Every search you do includes AI. Every customer service interaction you have includes AI. It's here to stay. I think what we're most concerned about is disinformation. So the increasing encroachment on media, on democracy, on the information that we all consume. And that's going to mean a lot to civil society and specifically to nonprofits. And I'd argue that the biggest threat is not the technology itself, which can be very useful as a tool. It's the timing. AI is coming to the fore during an era of increasing repression, extremist rhetoric, particularly from the far right, open bigotry and xenophobia, especially anti-Semitism and attacks based on gender and sexual orientation, hatred of immigrants, the breakdown of norms in public civility and cooperation, and the general rise of coarse and hateful words and images. They're everywhere, wherever we turn these days, whatever social media platform we use or even don't use. Here's the problem. AI is based on large learning models, but this era is dominated by what I call large large hating models. The question we need to ask is this: will the vast onslaught of AI generated content, what some are calling AI slop, pretty good terminology there, be dominated by those dark images, evil impulses, horrendous words and language? I worry that the answer is yes. Large language models are trained on existing data, and if that data is increasingly poisoned by extremism, disinformation, and hatred, then the outputs will reflect and amplify those toxins, especially if they are linked to digital media algorithms that reward attention. We're already seeing AI tools being weaponized to create deepfakes, spread conspiracy theories, and target the most vulnerable communities. So, what do? Leaders in our sector must guard against this with human interventions. We need content moderation, ethical AI development, and strong community standards, both in the general community, but also in the organizations that we all help to run. We need to fight for transparency in how those systems are built and deployed, and we need legislatures to catch up and figure out new restrictions that protect people without stifling innovation. This is one of those areas where civil society organizations have to be proactive, not reactive. We can't afford to wait until the damage is done. Watch this space closely because AI in the hands of authoritarians is a dangerous amplifier of hate. Headline number 3: the balkanization problem. For nonprofit leaders, particularly in the US, the continued balkanization of our sector leaves us vulnerable to ongoing attacks from this rogue administration. We've seen threats to 501c3 status being wielded as a weapon. We've watched major institutions surrender to funding threats rather than stand on principle. We've witnessed the collapse of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across the board. And through it all, there's been an ongoing lack of cohesive nonprofit lobby representing the 10% of America's workforce and a large percent of American GDP that works in this sector. We're still open and vulnerable. We work in silos. Does Mackenzie Scott collaborate with the Ford Foundation? Do major environmental groups coordinate with racial justice organizations? Are healthcare nonprofits talking to housing advocates? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The answer far too often is, of course, no. We're competing for scarce dollars. And that's a problem. I understand the competitive dynamics. Grants are competitive. Major donors are up for grabs, foundation funding, media attention. But this is not a normal time. We're in an existential fight for the survival of civil society itself in this country. The Trump administration knows that divided opposition is weak opposition. They pick off organizations one at a time. First, they came for the immigration nonprofits. Then they came for environmental groups and legal aid organizations. Each time, too many of us stayed silent, thinking we'd be spared if we kept our heads down. Of course, as Benjamin Franklin may or may not have said, if we do not hang together, we will all hang separately. What we need in 2026 is radical collaboration, coalition building across issue areas, a unified voice that says you attack one of us, you attack all of us. We need the infrastructure of collective defense, where law firms, universities, foundations, and nonprofits stand together when any one institution comes under authoritarian assault. This is the year we have to stop thinking of ourselves as a million separate nonprofits and start thinking of ourselves as a movement, because that is what it's going to take. Headline 4: the continued attack. Take 2. Headline 4: the continued crime against humanity. As I've said before, the death of USAID will continue to cost hundreds of thousands of lives for the poorest of the poor around the world and hobble the NGOs who have built capacity to do the work on the ground. Killing off USAID is a crime against humanity. I've said that before. I'm going to keep saying it this year. Given the wealth of the United States and the critical role this agency has played in providing humanitarian aid, disaster relief, health interventions, and development assistance to the world's most vulnerable population, it absolutely is a crime. The political extremes hate nonprofits and their ongoing partnership with government. They see the international development work as globalist interference. They want to pull up the drawbridge and let the rest of the world fend for itself. But here's the thing: human suffering doesn't stop just because an administration changes its priorities. Children will still go hungry, diseases will still spread, natural disasters will still strike. And the organizations that have built expertise and relationships on the ground over decades are now scrambling to find alternative funding sources. I don't think Private philanthropy can fill the gap. The scale is just too massive. But I do think in 2026, we'll see more efforts to pick crucial spots for intervention, major involvement. And I think that's a good thing. So we should watch out for that. Foundations may have to make some hard choices about where they can have the most impact. And we may see some interesting developments on the international stage. The dismantling of USAID opens the door for other large economies to step up in humanitarian aid, including Europe and China. Yeah, there are significant obstacles there, and the politics will always be tricky. European nations are dealing with their own budget pressures and political upheaval, particularly from the right wing. China's approach to international development comes with strings attached that many in the West are uncomfortable with. But I still think global cooperation to support the poor and sick and those who are essentially downtrodden in human life is a worthy cause. I hope we see renewed commitment from other wealthy nations to fill at least some of the void left by the American withdrawal. And I think we still have to fight on the political commons for the reinstatement of USAID. We need to keep advocating loudly for that restoration. We need to document the human cost of these cuts, and we need to support the NGOs doing this critical work however we can. This is a headline center that demands our attention and our action, and I think we should follow it closely in 2026. Headline center number 5, the final one. And I think this is going to be an overlay on a lot of what happens in 2026 in the United States. It's the political year ahead. This year will be a harsh and dangerous political year. The congressional midterm elections represent an existential threat to this administration, which prefers to act as an authoritarian regime rather than as a co-equal branch of a liberal democratic republic, which is what it's supposed to be. And let's be honest about what that means. There may be more violence. We've already seen the escalation in recent years. The threat is out there. An administration that feels cornered, and frankly, those who support this administration will likely encourage and perhaps tolerate more of it. There may be a constitutional crisis. Efforts to delegitimize election results, suppress votes, or refuse to accept outcomes that we don't like. These are all on the table for this coming year. And I think that for organizations, coalitions that work with immigrants, with the poor, with the LGBTQ community, in justice reform and reproductive health, environmental protection, and closing the massive economic inequality gap in this country and many other causes, we may find ourselves kind of in the crosshairs of this epic political struggle that's coming and promises to be very, very nasty. I've said it before, but I don't think there's safety in silence and hiding away and keeping our heads down. Don't think that's going to work. They'll find us. The organizations that have tried to fly under the radar have found themselves mostly targeted anyway. The administration doesn't really reward compliance. It sees it as a weakness and it will always ask for more. I continue to believe that working in tight coalitions, strong collaboration, and with brave outside voices, it's what's needed. That means forming explicit partnerships across issue areas. It means coordinated messaging and advocacy. It means mutual legal defense when organizations come under attack. And yeah, it means being willing to show up on the street at demonstrations, to speak publicly, to use every tool of democratic participation that we have. The midterm elections will be a referendum not just on this administration's policy, but on the future of American democracy. And civil society organizations have a critical role to play, not as partisan actors, but as defenders of democratic norms, voting rights, and the rule of law. It's going to require significant courage. It's going to take significant resources. We're going to have to stand up and commit to a sustained action over the next 10 months and behind. But if we won't fight for this, who will? Civil society itself is at stake. So those are the 5 headline centers that I'm watching for in 2026 on this first Monday, the first day of work of 2026. Pope Leo's moral leadership on the global stage, the dangerous intersection of AI technology in an era of hatred, critical need to overcome the balkanization of the nonprofit sector, the humanitarian crisis created by gutting international aid, and the political battles ahead in a midterm year that could determine the future of American democracy. Again, none of these are predictions. They're just areas that I think demand our vigilance, our strategic thinking, and sometimes our collective action. They're signposts and warning lights. And they're not easy. But if you care about justice and equality and building a better world, You have to be involved. I know it can feel overwhelming. The threats are real. It's tempting to keep your head down, but the challenges are enormous. It does feel like there are days when we're holding back a tsunami with a bucket. Every generation faces insurmountable odds, or so it seems. And yet progress happens. As I said in the first podcast in this series, we're still here. This sector is still here. As Steve Manzi, I think, eloquently said last week, at the end of the day, it's the community that matters, and therefore it's the work that matters. We have to find each other in this battle, and we have to work together. As James Baldwin said, ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. So our job is to break through that ignorance, to speak truth, to defend the vulnerable, to build coalitions and institutions that can withstand the authoritarian assault. So we'll see how the year unfolds. In any case, Happy New Year and enjoy this first week of the year. We're all getting back to the work that needs to be done to help people make this a better place for everyone. And thanks for tuning into this podcast. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Hit that bell, as they say. And we're planning to bring you some actionable intelligence and some interesting voices from the front lines of this uncivil society throughout 2026. I'm Tom Watson. Stay strong, stay together, and I'll see you next time.